When people go skiing, they expect to have a nice time. Arriving at the slopes and getting a ride up in the ski lift, spending time with your family and friends, and when it's time to close, it's time to go back down. However, what if you were forgotten, left to be frozen? Here's the story of three friends where freezing is the least of their worries. Please like, share, and subscribe. The movie begins in New England on Mount Holliston, where three friends, Dan Walker, Joe Lynch, and his girlfriend, Parker O'Neill, came to the mountain for a ski trip. You see, Dan and Joe are childhood friends who go on a ski trip every year as a celebration. Most of the time, Joe flirts with the ski lift operator and gets cheaper tickets. But this time, a man stands in her place, and then the guy suggests that Parker flirt with him to get cheaper tickets. And as she's doing that, Joe complains to Dan about bringing a girl to an all-boys trip. It is also evident that Joe doesn't think highly of Parker, pointing out that she can't even ski. Dan then apologizes to his friend, saying that he thought it would be okay. He also stated that he thought it would be a great bonding opportunity as they all head up to the top of the mountain. On the way up, Joe criticizes Parker for smoking too much and causes Parker to throw an insult back. Dan sits in the middle of the two and tries to mediate. All of a sudden, the ski lift stops working and people sitting start complaining. Parker is afraid of heights, while Joe makes fun of her. Dan then steps in and protects his girlfriend, trying to make her feel more comfortable as the lift starts back up again. While skiing, Dan and Joe are unable to have fun due to Parker continuously falling. As Parker falls, it continues to annoy Joe. Later, back at the resort where they were staying, the two boys discuss their disappointment about the day, and they want to take that last lift back up for one more trip. As the two boys reminisce, Parker overhears them and apologizes for ruining the trip. Dan, feeling bad for her, invites her to come back up for this last endeavor. Parker states she wants to stay in her room because she doesn't enjoy skiing anyway. However, Dan insists, so the three of them make their way to the lift in the dark for the final trip. As the trio reaches the lift, they see the same man that Parker was flirting with, and he refuses at first, but they beg him to let them go back up. He said that they didn't even pay for the full price the first time. And as there's an uneasy silence between the trio, the operator further states that there's a bad storm approaching and adamantly refuses, but changes his mind once they offer him $100. As the three friends enjoy the ride back up, admiring other skiers below, someone approaches the lift operator. It's his co-worker telling him about next week's schedule, which doesn't make him happy. He's supposed to be at his brother's wedding. Angrily, he walks off, leaving the other worker to watch the lifts. However, before he leaves, he tells him there are three people still up on the lifts to wait before shutting down. Later, the worker sees three people and shuts it down. He assumes that these three people are the ones that the operator were talking about, unaware that Parker, Dan, and Joe are still in the lift, and he shuts it down. At first, when the lift stops, the group thinks it's just an inconvenience. However, Joe becomes frustrated and starts yelling out, to no avail. You see, the resort workers are about to shut down the facility as it gets cold and the temperature drops. To pass the time, the three talk about other worse ways to die, but they are unaware of the horrors awaiting them. The three try to remain composed until they realize the lights go off and that the ski resort is closing, leaving them stuck and stranded. As the three start yelling out for help, Parker says no one knows that they're there. However, Dan says that yes, they'll be rescued. It's just a matter of time. As the three debate, Parker suddenly remembers that it's Sunday and the ski resort won't be open again until next Friday, leaving them stranded. Meaning if no one comes for them, they'll be stranded for over a week in freezing temperatures, leaving them suspended about 70 feet above the ground. They are terrified. Later, Joe has to pee and eventually just lifts the rail up and pees down into the valley below. Parker is disgusted while Dan just looks embarrassed. As the night progresses, the three become terrified as they realize it starts snowing. And just at the last minute, they see a tractor coming, and with their hopes raising, the tractor's lights appear But the weather is so horrific, he can't see in front of him, more or less up in a skylift that's sitting 70 feet above him. He calls it in to his dispatcher and he tells him to come back, and the driver leaves. As they scream in horror for him to come back, he turns and leaves, with the weather progressively getting worse and worse. The three then try throwing things at him to get his attention, but he doesn't hear them. Later, Parker tries to smoke a cigarette, but then drops his gloves. They then realize the only way for them to survive is for one of them to jump down and try to go get help. Dan agrees to try and do it, since he thinks the snow should break his fall. Both Joe and Parker disagree with him doing this, and Joe says he should wait till the morning. Parker agrees, however, Dan throws his snowboard and then jumps. At first it looks like he's gonna land safely, but Dan horrifically breaks both of his legs. The other two ask him if he's okay, but he only hears mumbling for a few seconds. Once looking at his legs, Dan is horrified to see bone protruding through both of them. But this is nothing compared to what's about to happen next. Parker then tries to throw a scarf down so he can stanch the bleeding. However, it lands in a tree, doing Dan no good. His best friend Joe then tries to make a ball out of a scarf and throws it down, but as Dan reaches over, he pushes the bone in his legs even more through his skin. And after semi-securing them, he looks up at Joe and tells him to try to reach one of the control towers which has ladders. Maybe he can climb down and come and help. Terrified, Joe tells him that he can barely do a push-up. However, he's gonna try to help his best friend, and just as he tries, they start hearing growling in the ground. You see, a pack of gray wolves have tracked Dan's blood trail. They've smelled him, and they're hungry. Meanwhile, his best friend Joe has climbed up onto the lift but slips back down because of the ice as he hears a wolf growling at Dan below. And as Parker decides to throw her snowboard at the animal to try and drive him away, it works. However, he comes back with the rest of the pack that surrounded Dan. Just then, he begs Joe not to let Parker watch. And as Dan tries to remain stoic and Parker and Joe not looking, the wolves surround Dan and begin to devour him as he screams. They literally rip him apart. And as the night progresses, the only noise that can be heard are the eerie sounds of bones crunching. And while Joe and Parker are arguing about why Dan shouldn't have jumped, Joe says he tried to stop him, and eventually they both just cry and hold on to one another in the freezing cold. As the night progresses and the daybreak comes, Parker, who was holding onto a bar on the skylift, tries to remove her hand, but her skin removes away from the bar due to frostbite. During the night, the temperatures dipped, and the two now have frostbite all over their bodies. Not to mention, they're not going to make it another day. While Joe suggests that he goes and try to reach the control tower, Parker says no, let's wait a few more hours to see if someone comes. A little while later, Joe falls asleep, while Parker mistakenly urinates on herself and begins to cry. As the two realize their dire situation, they start reminiscing and talking about the time they spent with Dan, trying to pass the time, realizing they don't have much. As the weather continues to change, Joe decides it's time to try and climb to the control tower. His hands don't stick to the rope this time. However, as he crawls across, he slips and a bolt breaks. Once the bolt breaks, it launches him back into the chair. And as he looks down, he sees one lone wolf waiting for him. As Parker tries to throw her ski pole down to help Joe, he climbs down but is immediately attacked by the dog. He's able to grab the ski stick and hit it. As Joe grabs onto the ski board, Parker tells him to be careful as he's chased by the pack of wolves. Parker is now alone in freezing cold temperatures elevated about 70 feet. Hours pass and Parker's still alone. Hasn't heard back from Joe. She thinks the wolves have gotten to him, but she waits until the next day and he still hasn't returned. Eventually, Parker moves around in a chair. The boat gives way and plummets Parker to the ground, hitting her leg, breaking it. As she crawls away sometime later, barely able to move, she comes across the horrific scene of Joe's remains. The wolves did catch him, and since the one wolf is still full from eating Joe, he doesn't mess with her as she crawls away, eventually being found by a passerby and rescued. We hope you enjoyed our movie review of Frozen, a suspense thriller. Please like, share, and subscribe to Where in the World is Frank and Gina? Simply type in Frank and Gina to get to our YouTube channel and see some of our other movie reviews. God bless.